Hello YouTube, I'm Andrew Does Hair. You can find my work on Instagram at Andrew Does Hair. Today I want to do a somewhat simple video. I want to talk about why your hair does stuff, why your hair is doing exactly what it's doing right now at this moment, and just to kind of point out what factors you can't change because they're kind of baked in versus what factors we can work on and change. So this is really going to be like a very fundamental, basic, like I'm teaching my 4-year-old about his hair sort of video, but a lot of this stuff I think we either kind of don't know on average or we don't think about it much, but hopefully it'll kind of just help you to understand that like your hair is unique, your head is unique, and maybe it'll help to, I don't know, kind of define what I mean when I say repeatedly in my videos that your head is the ruler. So factor number one is your skull shape. I started there because that's the deepest part of what's going on here. Like well underneath the skin, you have corners and angles and things of your skull. Now I'm not talking about something as generic as like if you have a heart-shaped face, you should get this kind of haircut. I don't like those kind of charts, but on a much smaller level, we have things like a parietal ridge, which is the widest part of your head. On my head, it's relatively high and I have a whole bunch of flat space beneath it. But on some people, the widest part of their head is like right above their ears. So some of these corners and angles and shapes can actually change how your hair acts and how it moves. There's a lot of different examples of this happening, but I'll just break down one really quick here. See, your apex would be the highest point on your head. You can find it by resting a comb flat on top of your head. So where it's going to sit is the highest point. So if your apex is high relative to your hairline, meaning there's a large distance between this height and this height, your hair is going to act in a certain way that it wouldn't if your head was relatively flat. Most men's haircuts, and I'm going to skip forward and talk about shape a little bit here, which I'll speak on a lot more in a little bit. Most men's haircuts are cut to a square shape, meaning every hair is pulled up straight here, cut to a flat line. I didn't do this haircut. I found it sitting around the salon, but you can see there's basically a square shape here. So almost every men's haircut you see, I'd say like 90% of them, that's how it's cut. It's a square shape, parallel to the floor. Meaning, if your head is round and you're cutting it to a square shape, the variance between this length and this length is going to differ based on the shape of your head. If the highest part of your head is a whole lot higher than the lowest part of your head, and you get your basic typical haircut, if no other factors are different except this one factor, the shape of the skull there, these hairs being shorter will be more rigid in comparison to the longer hairs. So when we have a steeper head shape here, if no other factors are different and somebody just mindlessly like pushes their hands back in their hair like this all the time, what you would get on average is more volume in front than the next guy because you have more rigid hairs behind the length in the front, causing it to act differently. So I know that seems like a really minor, obscure little difference, but it is a factor. The next factor we're going to talk about is the growth patterns. So everybody's hair grows out of their head, typically at a bunch of angles. Maybe there's somebody out there, but most people's hair doesn't just grow straight out from their head. Typically in the back of your head, you've got what's called a whorl, or it's near the crown. Some people call it a crown, whorl. It's that spiral thing in the back. Some people have 2 of them. Some people have 10 of them. Most people have 1. And your hair tends to grow in a circular pattern out from that center point. This is most people. This growth pattern, I don't want to say it's limiting, but it is going to give us a huge influence on what our hair does. If your hair is really short and you try to comb it against the way it grows, it's going to pop up like it's doing right here. If your hair is really long and you comb it against the way that it grows, you're going to get some volume there. So something that happens often is I'll do a haircut that is meant to be symmetrical so it can go either way. And what I often find is when I part the hair in the direction it lays, it tends to lay really flat to the head. And I'll tell people like, hey, if you want neat and tidy hair, comb it the direction it grows and it'll lay flat to your head. Where if you want bigger, messier hair, if you comb it against the way it grows, and I don't even know if this head is going to do this, I haven't tested it yet, but believe it or not, these heads sometimes do have growth patterns, and I think this one does too. But if I comb it the opposite way, you can see it pops up. It's a lot bigger. Point being, your growth patterns have a lot to do with what your hair is doing. Your hair is growing out of your head at different angles all over the place. So when you get a haircut, oftentimes the first thing we'll do is we'll comb your hair around and look at these growth patterns. We'll kind of like hyper focus on the scalp to see what they're doing. And I like to get the hair wet and comb it around and see what the growth patterns are willing to let us do. Sometimes you can go against them. Sometimes you can't, but it's a case-by-case thing, and it has a lot to do with what your hair is going to do. So the third factor is your length. If you take 2 pieces of material that are the identical material, one of them's a foot long, and let's say it's a steel rod, right? You have a foot long steel rod, it's going to be very rigid, maybe hard to bend. But if that same kind of steel rod is 6 or 12 or 20 feet long, it's going to become more and more wobbly and easier to bend as it becomes longer. Your hair is exactly like that. I hear all the time from clients, people who historically have always had a long top with short sides, which is most haircuts. People will think my hair's good here, it flows here, it listens here, it's easy to style here, but every time I try to grow it out, I remember that I have bad hair here. And I point out to them, it's not that it's different hair, it's that it's shorter. Short hair doesn't bend, short hair doesn't move. Short hair likes to stick out. And so the longer your hair is, the more flexible it becomes. And so whether you're trying to get more volume by cutting down that length a little bit so it's less flexible and it can pop up more, or whether you're trying to get less volume by growing the hair a little longer so it lays flatter, just knowing that your specific length is going to severely change how your hair acts and what it does. So another factor is the shape of your haircut. And I'm going to put this in the tiniest little nutshell ever here because it's cosmetology school. Haircutting is all about geometry. When we learn haircuts, we learn shapes. And as I said earlier, most men's haircuts are a square shape, meaning like you pull the hair up, you cut it parallel to the ground, it is shaped like a square. Another shape would be triangular, which is like longer in the front, shorter in the back, or round, which would be where you pull every hair straight out from where it grows and you cut it to a round shape, obviously. Just about every haircut fits into one of these shapes here, and they act differently, they react differently. The difference between your hair flipping out and flipping in, that comes down to the angle you hold it when you cut it. It comes down to the geometry. If I do a haircut that is considerably longer on the top and shorter on the side, so the shape of the haircut comes something like this, it's going to act very, very differently than if I do a haircut that is the same length on the top as it is on the sides here. This would be a layered haircut. It's got a lot of movement. If I comb it down, it hugs flat to the head. There's not any point where a bunch of hairs pile up on each other. However, if I cut it to a steep angle here, all of these heavy hairs would pile up on the hairs beneath them and it would push outward. It would give us an angular silhouette. So these different shapes of these haircuts will cause your hair to act differently. It can be the difference between hair flipping out or hair flipping in. It could be the difference between hair having volume and hair laying flat. And it's like, I could sit and break it all down, but as I said earlier, it's essentially, now we're talking cosmetology school in one video, and it's just easier to hire a good hairdresser. But just know that the shape of your haircut totally dictates how your hair moves and what it does. Your hair texture is another huge factor that plays into what your hair is willing to do. A good way to think of this is like, if you go to a tailor, they're probably not going to tailor a silk shirt the same way that they would tailor a denim jacket. Probably a whole different process. Probably a whole different fit guide, I imagine. I don't know anything about silk shirts or denim jackets really, but some people's hair is really soft and fine and it bends easily. And you might think of it kind of like silk. Some people's hair is really coarse and really stubborn. You might think of that more like denim or canvas. And so while it's all material, it acts very, very differently. So if somebody comes in and they've got really fine hair and they say, I want a whole bunch of volume, that's going to be a much different approach, maybe even a whole different kind of haircut. Versus if a guy comes in with crazy coarse hair and he says, I can't stop having volume, I need to kind of have less volume, but my hair just sticks out all the time. It's like they could go for the exact same look, but it's going to be a very different road to get there because of the texture. So your texture has so much to do with what your hair does and how it does it. So a lot of the times, when we're sort of planning a haircut and a styling routine and a hair care routine, so much of it is contingent on the texture of your hair. Another factor that's going to change how your hair acts is your density. And this might seem kind of obvious, but if you have very dense hair, it's a lot easier to get some volume in it. It can be harder to get it to lay down flat. Or on the flip side, if you don't have a lot of density, it can be hard to get some volume. Very easy to get it to lay flat. Think of it like if I have a bundle of like 6 ropes and I'm holding them together and I'm trying to get these ropes to stand erect here. 6 ropes might flop and bend down if they're sticking a foot out of my hand here. But if I have 60 ropes in there all packed together and I do the same thing, they're all going to stand much more easily because they support each other up. So when you have more dense hair, the hairs kind of push against each other and help to push each other outward. It can be way easier with denser hair to get volume in there. And not that it's impossible with less dense hair, but it's just, again, it's like a different path to get the result. And there's different cutting methods involved too. When you're cutting very dense hair, you have to take very small, concise little sections. So a huge factor in what your hair does and how it does it comes down to your density. So now we're getting into some styling stuff, and this is things you can keep in mind for at home. A huge factor as far as what your hair does is setting your hair. What I mean by that is, how scientific do I want to go here? Anything your hair dries doing, it's going to want to stay doing. Your hair is very, very stubborn and very strong. Think about when you wear a baseball cap all day and you get a dent in the side of your head. Think about how stubborn that dent is, how hard it is to get it out of there. You have to basically shampoo your hair to undo it. Now, that's not product holding a dent in your hair. That's not hairspray holding a dent in your hair. That's not a haircut putting a dent in your hair. That is your hair holding a dent all on its own because some outside force clamped it down for a few hours, heated it, and eventually when you took off the hat, the dent stayed there. So when I say setting your hair, I mean taking that and using it to your advantage, setting the hair where you want it. Now there's two kinds of setting we use in styling. One is a wet set, which is you take a product that's a little bit heavier, a little bit stronger than your wet hair, and you use that to glue your hair where you want it until the product is dry. Now, I'm not talking about products where the product gets rock hard and you can't comb through it and can't run your fingers through it. Sure, that is technically a wet set still, but that's relying on the product being hard all day. Typically with a wet set, you want to use a gel or a mousse or something that will not flake after it moves. And then what you do is you set your hair, you comb it right where you want it, you let it air dry completely, and then you can brush it out and you get a very soft look. Back in the day when like 1960s or something, when the wet head stopped being popular and guys started doing like kind of the more dry look, it was a common thing for dudes would put a gel in their hair, they'd slick their hair back, they'd put their fedora on, and then they'd drive to the office, and when they're sitting in their office later, they put their hat on a hook and they grab a brush out of their desk drawer and they brush out their hair. So that's a wet set. So the other kind of set would be a thermal set. This is blow dry, flat iron, curling iron, any thermal styling. When you cook your hair, it becomes malleable, and then wherever it cools, it stays. Just like ironing a shirt. If you take a cold iron to a shirt, it doesn't do anything. If you take a hot iron to a shirt, now that material has become real flexible, and essentially, as we know, whatever it cools doing, it's gonna stay wanting to do. You take a hot t-shirt out of the dryer, and if you're not careful with it, it's gonna cool with wrinkles. So your hair actually works the same way. If you cook it, and then it gets real hot, it'll when it first dries, it's gonna be big and frizzy and poofy, and you're gonna think you did it wrong. But if you keep going after it's big and frizzy and poofy, then all the frizz will go away. And if you brush it around while you're doing this, it'll become really malleable. And then wherever you put it, when you cool it off, that's why your dryer has a cold button, wherever it's sitting as it cools is where it's gonna want to stay. So this is thermal styling, and your hair can stubbornly hold the volume, lay down the cowlick, whatever thing you want it to do, it can stubbornly do it just as stubbornly as it will hold a hat dent that you don't want it to do. So if you've done nothing to your hair today, it's still set doing something. Every time it dries, it sets, whether or not you cook it. It's just like wet hair is neutral. Dry hair has set in some kind of way. Like my hair, I tuck it behind my ears all the time because it bugs me. And after it sits there a while, you better believe it holds this curve in the shape of my ear. That's the hair setting. So the final factor that's going to make your hair do stuff, and possibly the least important, is your product. Now, dude, I've been doing hair like 21 years, and my perspective on hair product, even though I've owned a product line for like 13 years now, my idea of what product is and what it's for and what it can do still is evolving all the time. And most recently, the way I look at product is, sure, again, there's stuff, I don't touch the stuff, but there's stuff that you could put in there, it gets rock hard and it holds your hair wherever you want it. That's how 8th graders do their hair. But I realized it's kind of silly. We shampoo our hair because like, oh no, it's oily. And then immediately we're like, well, now I have to condition it because I just shampooed all the oils out. And then every single styling product is some kind of wax or oil because our hair looks good when it's a little bit oily. So I look at hair product now as essentially, it's kind of like synthetic funk in your hair, synthetic grime, synthetic oils, synthetic scalp grease, sebum. So essentially, like applying styling product to your hair is almost always, it's kind of just to make your hair look like you lived in it for a little bit. I have a client who comes in looking really cool all the time. And one time I was like, dude, your hair looks fantastic. Like, what did you do to it? And he's like, dude, I just came from the construction site. It's full of brick dust and sweat. And it looked really good. And it's funny because you look at some of these matte pastes and things, and it's like ingredients like some kind of dust or clay or earth in it, like a brick, and some kind of beeswax or oil like sebum and sweat. So point being, what you could do with your product by itself, that's like beginner 101 hairstyling when you're in 8th grade, heavy product, glue your hair in place. But when you take all of these factors we talked about and you have a good haircut based on your head shape to cause your hair to act in the way that you want it to, you're aware of your texture, you have all these things diagnosed and locked in. When it comes to your product, and I'm pointing at this head with no product in it as I say that, when it comes to your product, it's about putting in like kind of the right kind of dirty to your hair. If your hair tends to lay too flat or look too greasy, you want something that's a little bit matte and something that's going to give it some volume. Like I really like ADH Dry for that. When my hair is laying too flat and too greasy, I put some ADH Dry at the roots and it lifts it up, almost like a sea salt spray. But on the flip side, if your hair tends to be big and frizzy when it's freshly shampooed, and after you live in it and it gets some oils in it, the frizz kind of tones down. Now you need some kind of oil that's going to take your frizz down. But product can absolutely change a lot about how your hair acts. But it's interesting to me that the goal is usually to get it to act the way that it naturally begins to act when it's been lived in, or dirty, for lack of a better term. I know that last one, that's kind of out there, kind of crazy, but that's just a sort of philosophy that I've been overthinking lately as I work with clients and I look at different products. I was going to wrap this up in some big, insightful way, but I didn't really plan anything. Let me see if I can wing it. When you're looking for hair advice and you want your hair to be better, there's a lot of factors that you can't change, that maybe you can self-diagnose, but realistically, it's really hard to do that. Everybody thinks they have a round face. Everybody thinks they have the worst cowlicks. There's a lot of things that kind of like cross-reference and intermingle. And I would say, from my perspective as a hairstylist, all these things I talked about, I don't sit and individually think about each one and give some binary yes or no answer to will this work, and then I go down a checklist. It's more like you touch the hair, move the hair, and then your intuition as a hairdresser tells you what the hair is going to do, and it's sort of going through all these different factors all at once, and it feels like a gut feeling is what it feels like. And it took me a little bit of effort and note writing to kind of break it down into these pieces like this. But when somebody comes in and they go, my hair is doing this thing, I don't like that it's doing that thing, then I kind of RoboCop view of the world, look at the hair, and then an answer spits out and it goes, well, this is what's causing the hair to do that, and these are the factors I can change as a hairdresser to cause a different outcome. So maybe I wanted to point out the complexity of it. Like, at the end of the day, you can do all kinds of learning online, and that's great, but there is a sea of information about products and styling techniques and cutting techniques, and like, really what you probably should do is sit down with somebody who knows what they're doing and let them get their fingers in your hair, let their intuition kind of put all the pieces together for you. And if you happen to be in Nashville or Southern California, I'd love to do these things for you. Thanks for watching.